I have a tie, but unless you force me, I'm not going
Good
to.
afternoon and welcome to VetNet. My name is Elvis Savdic and today's topic is B.A.I.L team, 4 pillars for business success. And this VetNet is brought to you by IBMF, Institute for Veterans and Military Families. And today our moderator is Mirza Tihic, and I'm going to kick it off to him to introduce himself and let everybody else in this session introduce themselves as well. Mirza.
All right, thanks, Alice. As Alice said, my name is Mirza Tehic. I'm with Syracuse University. I work in the Office of Veteran and Military Affairs. And our goal here is to make Syracuse the best place for veterans. We work very, very closely with the Institute for Veterans and Military Families. I worked a lot within the IBMF on the entrepreneurship end. And it's my honor and pleasure today to moderate the B.A.I.L team, the banker, accountant, insurance, and lawyer team, the 4 pillars of business success. So we'll talk about really the importance of the B.A.I.L team today. How do you go about finding the proper B.A.I.L team, identify them, how you build those relationships, maintain those relationships, and then how do you leverage those relationships to build your business. That said, I'll let everybody else introduce themselves and then we go from there. Thank you.
Should we start with you, Patrick?
Sure. Thank you. So I am Patrick Griffin. I am a business banking officer with M&T Bank. I've spent 12, 13 years of my career in financial services. I've been in banking for about 2, and I work with small businesses across the spectrum, everywhere from brand new startup to roughly $40 million a year company listed on an exchange. So broad spectrum of client base.
Thanks, Patrick. Let's go to Mike.
Oh, Mike. I'm sorry. Yes, this is Mike Helmer. I'm a lawyer, managing partner with DLA Piper, based in Short Hills, New Jersey. Although our firm is one of the largest law firms in the world, with offices in most of the countries around the world. I've been a corporate lawyer representing and organizing businesses for almost 30 years. I speak and have spoken at the EVV convention in Charlotte, also up at Syracuse University, on organizing and issues relating to small businesses, as well as negotiating business contracts. So I also represent the companies that are incubated at Picatinny Arsenal here in New Jersey, and have relations with the Department of Defense as well as Department of Energy. So I'm delighted to be here and advise in any way I can.
Great, thanks, Mike. Let's go to Marty.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Marty Byrne. Similar to Patrick, I work for M&T Bank. I work in our commercial insurance division, and I've been with M&T now for just short of 3 years. Prior to that stint, I worked for one of our local competitors here in Syracuse. So I have about 7 years in the insurance industry, and I primarily work with small businesses, businesses with less than $50 million in revenue here locally, as well as I've spent a great deal of time working with startup businesses as well. Primarily working with the Tech Garden here in Syracuse. I've been helping a lot of the startup tech businesses get their footing, and I've been acting as a consultant on the insurance side. So very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick, Mike, and Marty for joining us today. I think we're still expecting an accountant, because that's the A in the B.A.I.L. But that said, I know from personal experiences working with entrepreneurs, a lot of times they're trying to do everything by themselves. A lot of times the perception is, the B.A.I.L team might be too expensive, or they don't know how to go about the B.A.I.L team. Just want to get input from you guys, clear you why having a relationship with each of the B.A.I.L member would be beneficial and important to any entrepreneur, including aspiring entrepreneurs. Let me start again with Patrick, then Mike and Marty.
Sure. And Mirza, I'm sorry, you dropped out for a moment. Just do you want to talk about the importance of B.A.I.L or?
But yeah, importance of B.A.I.L, why actually having relationship, finding a B.A.I.L member, why working with the banker, why finding a proper banker, why is it important for entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs, and what stage is it different for people that are just starting businesses or people that are already in business?
Sure. Perfect. Thank you. So that's something that's certainly in line with M&T's approach to our relationships, and this isn't necessarily true for all banks, at least our particular approach to it. We believe that, well, one, we fully believe in the B.A.I.L construct, and specifically as it relates to bankers, the part that I can speak to, we encourage potential business owners or current business owners to develop a relationship with a banker as soon as possible. And that can really help you navigate a lot of the obstacles that you might reach as early as possible. So in terms of if you want to buy into an existing business or need capital to start up an existing business, most people only do that once if they ever do it. And so there are a lot of things that you may not know. Bankers work under those circumstances all of the time. So our job is to guide you along the way. And the nice thing is that, I mean, I have clients who will text me routinely and just ask me little questions. And so it's a very steady exchange of feedback back and forth. And we're able to provide that expertise on things that we see all of the time and that business owners may only see a handful of times. The nice thing, and I think that my colleagues on the board will also share and reiterate, is that I work directly with my clients' accountants, insurance agents, insurance companies, and attorneys routinely. So what we want to be is your team supporting you, allowing you to go out and do what you're really good at, in terms of the nature of your business or running your business. And so we will often work behind the scenes to help with any of those things that just kind of support you in any way that we can using our respective expertise.
Thanks, Patrick. How about Mike?
Sure. Well, not surprisingly, I'm going to tell you that that lawyers are important to the process, and like a lot of things, they're a necessary evil in a lot of ways, but they can also be an asset to you and an advocate for you. So the good news is that there's a lot of information out there that's available on the web. So you can go and you can look into fundamental issues with respect to organization, what type of form of organization you should be looking for, and what types of businesses might be available to you, and what types of financing or other things are advantageous to veterans on the Small Business Administration website. So there's a lot of information out there, and I recommend to anybody who is considering starting their own business or joining together with somebody else to start a business or acquiring a business should do their own research before they engage a lawyer. But then they should also research. Once they've done that, they should research what type of lawyer they should be looking for, and you should look on recommendations. I mean, Yelp and things like that are helpful. You can also call the Bar Association in the county that you're located in for referrals, and also word of mouth with other business people as to which lawyers are good and responsive and easy to work with, and which ones are not. And there's sometimes a misconception that for a small business that a small law firm is always the right answer, and that sometimes may be the case. They may have lower fees and maybe a little easier to work with. But other times, companies like ours, which are large, we can afford to be more generous with payment terms, and particularly if we really like your the business that you're in, can sort of nurture your company longer, and provide more resources for you. For instance, we have what we call the venture pipeline, which is relationships with 400 venture capitalists and angels who work to help fund your business. so we can help get your business plan in front of people like that. But other times, if you are looking to do a small local business, then you may never expand, outside of one store or one area. Then maybe a smaller local, well-regarded general business firm might be the right solution for you. So, but once, the most important thing is to educate yourself, prepare a business plan, which will include the reasons why not only you love your business, but other people will love your business as well. And then look around for a good lawyer who can help guide your business through its initial stages. Oh, and one other thing is, make sure you get the cost up front. Nothing is unhappier for the lawyer or for the client to have an unhappy surprise or expectations that weren't realized. If they say they can form your business for $1,000, does that include the filing fees or does that not include the filing fees? If you ask them to do an employment contract or do some additional work or check on a trademark for you, before you authorize them to do that, make sure you know what the costs are going to be in advance. So.
Great, thanks. We'll come back, both of you, with a couple more follow-up questions, but let's go to Marty. Please input.
Sure thing. Thank you. So our approach on the insurance side of things is sort of, in some ways, it's kind of the opposite of what Mike just said. Make sure you get the cost up front. On the insurance side, because we're working really as a consultant, we don't have any upfront costs. So there's no there's no contract, there's no costs up front, if you're working with a banker, your first question is probably, what rate can you get me? So that's more in line with the types of questions we get up front is, what kind of quote can you get me? So the answer to that question is usually based on, if you're working with a lawyer already, it can be based on contractual obligations. So we want to make sure if you have a contract in place with vendors or certain other folks that you're working with, we want to make sure that your insurance policy lines up with those contractual obligations. So that's going to be our the first thing that we look at. If you don't have any contracts in place, then we will base the insurance needs on really just building a relationship with you, the business owner, and in discussing what's important to you, what you want protection for, and then build an insurance policy from scratch. So that's kind of the way it works on our side. We act strictly as a consultant, and really we just want to meet your needs, regardless of whether they're contractual or not.
Great. Thank you, Marty. Kind of going back to Patrick, and it's really same question to you, who's at M&T Bank. I love M&T Bank because I always joke, Mirza Tihic, MT, my initials, my bank, but it's not. But I do business with M&T, and there's many reasons why I do it. But I just want to ask Patrick if you can share about what is information one should be looking from bank when they go picking what banks works for them, and what type of banks are out there, what are the pros and cons of different types of banks? Because you have the local, you have credit union, you have the full-profit banks, you have the international, national banks. What are some of the pros and cons of these banks, and what is what information should one be aware of and looking for as they try to pick what the right bank is for them? Eric, can you mute your phone, please? Thank
Sure.
you.
Sure, Mirza. And so let me just jump back one moment to something that Mike said that I thought was a good point. So Mike made reference to a business plan, getting a business plan together. And that's something that especially if you're launching a business or if you're acquiring a business, that's going to be important. That's not something that you have to do alone either. Here locally in Syracuse, We have a Syracuse Business Development Corporation that's supported by the SBA, and they help with anybody, frankly, walking in who wants help building a business plan. They have a great template. They'll provide free consultative advice that's federally funded through the SBA. I have a feeling that we're going to talk a lot about the SBA through this conversation, this VetSnat's conversation. But that's one thing to be aware of. Similarly to just jump back to what Marty and Mike said, bankers operate from a cost perspective similarly to insurance. So we don't have kind of when we pick up the phone, you're not going to get an invoice, for example, and that's because our structure is just different. We basically make money on if we're able to help you and connect you with services that you need. So if we provide lending, if we provide deposit services, doesn't mean there's explicitly a fee, but that's kind of how our model is mapped. In terms of how different banks operate, so the main two categories that people talk about are more credit unions and savings and loans. And credit unions can be really competitive from an interest rate perspective. They have a different model. They're more of a cooperative than a strict for-profit private business model. So they can be really competitive on rate. They can provide excellent, fairly simple, straightforward lending platforms for their customers. Sometimes we find that as our customers get a little bit larger, as their financial needs become a little bit more sophisticated, then they tend to need to move to a private for-profit bank that may or may not be a large bank, just based on exactly what each customer needs. But that's one thing to look for. The other thing that I would really recommend is that you meet multiple bankers. So ask around if you know people within the business community and businesses that are similar to yours. If you're friendly with them, ask them who they work with, who they've had a good relationship with. You want to meet different bankers because you want to find a person that is, one, knowledgeable, but is also a good fit for you. It'd be nice if all that mattered was, expertise and personality didn't matter at all. But this is somebody that ideally you'll want to feel free to call and interact with and benefit from their expertise. So it's helpful, or it can be helpful if it's somebody that you like and get along with well. That also can make it easier for the banker who, personally, the more I know about my customers, both their business and personally, the better I am at anticipating what their needs are and how I can help. And then I'm very frequently asked for referrals to other colleagues in the B.A.I.L network. I'm routinely asked for bankers that specialize in different areas, or accountants, insurance, et cetera. And knowing if we get along, if I know you better, it's going to be easier for me to make a recommended connection that's a good fit for you, both from an expertise perspective and a personality or culture fit perspective.
Thanks, Patrick. And over to Mike. Mike, you mentioned it a little bit previously in your conversation, large firm versus smaller firms, specialized firms, and so on. What are some pros and cons? What are some major differences in pros and cons? Let's go over major differences between large firm and small firm, and how do these differences impact or affect entrepreneurs, and how should one go about finding a great legal fit for them, or legal representation for them?
Well, I mean, a big part of it is geography. You don't necessarily have to meet your lawyer in person or your lawyers in person on a regular basis, but you do want to have them familiar with the laws of the place in which you're going to operate, and you also need to have make sure that the firm has all the areas of expertise that you think that you're going to need. For instance, if you want to buy a franchise, which is a very common way for entrepreneurs and particularly veterans to get into business, you would want to have experience. You'd want to have a law firm that has experience in negotiating, franchisees, people who buy franchises, so that they know what the issues are and what they should be looking for and how to protect you. If you have a business with that has intellectual property, if you think you're going to be able to patent your idea or your concept, you're going to want to make sure that that firm has experience in telling you whether or not your idea is patentable. If you think you're going to be doing business with the government, there are all sorts of rules and regulations that apply to people who are government contractors. If you want to go into real estate, you need a person who's got the real estate expertise. So my point is that there are lots of smaller general business firms that may have expertise in all of those areas, but oftentimes you may have to find with a smaller firm, a firm that has a specialty in the area that you're most likely to need. The advantage of working with a larger firm is that most large firms have people who have expertise in all those areas, and you may be able to do a one-stop shopping. The downside of that is a lot of times big law firms have a reputation for only wanting to talk to big clients and charging big fees, and that is in some instances that's true. What we have done and being part of B.A.I.L and EVB is to make ourselves available, and all the resources that we have in particular available to entrepreneurs. And as a matter of fact, we've had various programs in place over time where we have donated a certain amount of time to veteran-owned businesses. So it really is on a case-by-case basis. Again, it goes back to educating yourself and having a realistic view of what your business is and who it's going to appeal to and how big or how sophisticated it ultimately can be. I've got certain clients, and they don't have to be huge, but if they do business overseas, it's very difficult to have a smaller local firm that has a lot of experience in cross-border transactions and being able to put you in the right place or with the right person in the country in which you may want to do business. If your programmers are in Ukraine or in Eastern Europe or somewhere else, there are all sorts of issues that are attendant with that type of business. So, even if your business is not currently big, the issues that it's facing might be fairly sophisticated. So, so there are lots of issues to take into account. If you deal with quality people, and that's why we're all part of this network, is that hopefully they can steer you in the right direction. And if it doesn't happen to be them or for instance, us or our firm, we can help steer you into people who might be a good fit for your business. So, like I said, there's a lot of information on the web. You can do a great job of educating yourself, but there are also lots of pitfalls and potential dangers for you, and ultimately that's why you need lawyers before you're personally obligated on something that you never anticipated. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Let's go with the Marty. Same question in terms of insurance. How do I go about finding the proper insurance and some of those and downs of talking to insurance agent?
Sure. So the insurance industry over the past few years with technology has certainly changed quite a bit. And really, you have multiple options when you begin your search for insurance. And really, the first option you have is anybody can nowadays hop on the internet and get a really quick online quote. In fact, a lot of the insurance companies now are tailored for that. So if you know what you want, you can hop right online and get a quote instantaneously. Now, there are some pitfalls to that, and Mike kind of broached this a little bit. If you don't necessarily know what you need, or maybe you have a contract with somebody that requires certain things in your insurance contract, and you don't know about those, then are you addressing those needs in the quote that you're receiving online? And really, how do you know? So that's one of the pitfalls to getting an online quote. Another way that you can address your insurance is you can go through a company agent. These agents work directly for one specific insurance company. And the companies, at least here locally in Syracuse, that operate in this way are State Farm, Allstate, Nationwide. Those are just examples. So that you're working with an agent, and your agent can certainly help you navigate your insurance needs. However, when it comes to shopping your insurance needs, they only have access to the one company that they work for. The model that I work under and that we're finding is probably most beneficial is to work with an insurance broker, and that person can approach multiple insurance companies to meet any and all of your insurance needs, and as well as act as a consultant or an advocate for you. Learning what it is that you want to do with your insurance and finding the best way to protect you and your business. So those are kind of the three different ways that you can approach the insurance, your insurance needs, and it's really up to you for you to decide what works best for you.
Great, thank you, Marty. And we have Eric to join us from Gardner and Caporelli. Eric, we've been talking about the B.A.I.L team for entrepreneurs and small business owners. If you can please just quickly introduce yourself, tell us a little about your company, what you do, and then tell us also why it's important to have an accountant on your B.A.I.L team once you've done introducing yourself and your company. So thanks for joining us.
Yep, I apologize everyone for being late. I got held up in another meeting, couldn't get out of. But my name is Eric Cohen. I work for Gardner and Caporelli. We started about less than 2 years ago. We all came from a large regional firm in Syracuse, New York. So basically what Gardner and Caporelli does, we do your typical tax and sales tax filings, but the main thing that we do as well is basically we encompass a virtual CFO. Basically, we will take your entire back office between, not just your bookkeeping, but just, a CFO level as well, with managing your cash, running payroll, and basically strategic planning as well. So main things that I find with entrepreneurs, obviously, you're not filing your taxes on a postcard, as we all thought maybe that was potential. So sales tax, filings is another huge error we find, that people don't know the different rules between every single state. Some states, you do have to pay sales tax, others you don't, where some states you might not be paying sales tax, but you are required to be filing something as well. I find a lot of our clients are not aware of these, as well as with selling things online now. There's a lot of requirements between all these states if you have any sales employees in any of these states. Other thing that I find, you could have the best idea in the world, but if you don't know how to manage your cash flow, your business could fail very quickly. I have certain clients who always think way too short term and never looking at the big picture long term, as well as most of my clients always are thinking way, a year down the road, but they're not looking at what's happening this week. And, you could get into some really sticky situations if you're not managing your cash flow at all times. So that's a big thing that we help with our clients. The other thing I find is payroll. A common thing that I find people do is, as they're starting up, they have a lot of subcontractors that are just helping a little bit. And that's always growing in time. And you need to be able to know when that line happens where they are no longer a subcontractor and they're actually an employee of your company. And therefore you have additional responsibilities of, remitting payroll taxes, employer payroll taxes as well. I find a lot of times people kind of almost forget that, they actually now have employees and there's the responsibilities that come along with that.
Sounds good. And just quickly, okay, we'll come that tomorrow. There's a question from a viewer, but I'll come back to that. Just quickly to Eric, since I asked everybody else. what are some differences? What are the differences between small and larger firms, and how should one entrepreneur go about finding what's the best accountant, CPA, or even how about just having a bookkeeper? How's that relationship working? Because some of them might have a bookkeeper and an accountant. What are some of the pros and cons of that as well? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I only caught some of that. Is that written down somewhere, or could you just repeat yourself?
Yeah, I'll repeat myself. When it comes to entrepreneurs, how do I, as an entrepreneur, go about finding a proper accounting firm? And what are some cons and pros of small firm, specialized firm, large accounting firm? And is there also, what is your advice? Should somebody rather work in the beginning with the bookkeeper or bookkeeper and accountant? And how does those relationships work? What's your advice on that end?
I mean, only having a bookkeeper, you're not getting any strategic advice whatsoever. So it's with accounting, I would say, with most things in life, you're getting what you pay for. If you have the funds for a CPA and someone who has any strategic understanding in that industry, you can make a huge difference. Bookkeeping is simply just making sure your books are in order, but there's no forward thinking whatsoever there. With that said, there's nothing wrong with small or big firms. It really, to my opinion, it comes down to best fit, making sure that you're getting the service that you actually want. It shouldn't be something that, you feel uncomfortable talking to your accountants. You need to have a very honest and true conversation with them. So I would say, there's experience, obviously, one is extremely important, but also the fit there as well. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but
Okay, thanks. And then let's go quickly. There's a question from a viewer. It says, Rita Felton, I'm starting a leadership consulting business in a small town. Do I need insurance? And if so, how much? I think since it's an insurance question, let's go to Marty.
Sure. So I'll answer that question with everybody needs insurance. If you're starting a business, I recommend starting out with your basic insurance needs and building your insurance contract as you grow. So your basic needs, meaning I would recommend at least a $1 million general liability policy with a $2 million aggregate. Those would be the minimum limits I would carry on a liability policy. If you have any property you want to carry coverage for, any personal property, it could be anything that you value, that you want coverage for, that the business is going to own. You certainly want protection for that. I always use the example, the worst case scenario, if your business suffered from a fire and you lost that property, what would you value that property at? And that is what you should carry as a limit on your property policy. If you're running a consulting business, you're probably, I would assume you're in the car quite a bit. So need to determine if you want the business to own that vehicle or if you want to stay on that vehicle as a personal vehicle. And if the business owns the vehicle, you want automobile coverage for that. Again, I would recommend a minimum limit of $1 million for liability. And one more thing, if you're hiring or if you're planning to hire workers, I don't know where you're located, but New York State mandates that you carry workers' compensation insurance. So those would be the four main insurances that I would carry, as well as the minimum limits I would carry on your policy.
Thank you, Marty. Now, question for all. Let's start with the bankers, right? How do I go about establishing and maintaining a good relationship with my banker?
Mirza, I'm sorry, you said establishing and maintaining
a good relationship with a banker.
Oh, that's a very good question. So it really depends on the person. So I have clients that that I may be speaking to several times a week. I have clients that I may only speak to 2 or 3 times a year. So it will largely depend on what your particular needs are. As when you're in the startup stage or just in advance of launching or acquiring a business, then you're going to be what I would call a higher touch client than others, because we're just helping you work through more moving parts at that time. In terms of what that relationship looks like, I would say, listen to them. You can question them, of course, and frankly, you should. But listening and being responsive, being honest, preparing materials that the banker, that your banker asks for, and try to paint the picture. Because one of the things that you don't see, if there is lending involved, for example, so let's say you need a loan for really any amount of money, what the banker does is gathers a whole bunch of information from you, and then acts as advocate within the bank and tries to tell the story, paint the picture for other decision makers. Now there are times where a banker can quote unquote underwrite the loan, him or herself, but very often, especially with larger numbers, they need approvals from other people within the organization, and they need that information so that they can paint that picture for you. And those types of things, that easy transfer of information is very helpful towards building that relationship. So it really just boils down to relationships are about communication, and going back to what I said initially or earlier about really interviewing different bankers and making sure that you find one that you like and that's an appropriate fit for you. I think this is similar to what I believe it's Eric said, where you need to find that you need the expertise, but you also need the right fit for your business and for yourself. So starting out with the right individual or entity, and then having that communication back and forth will be crucial for building that relationship and maintaining it.
Patrick, this is Mike, the lawyer. Do you want to talk about personal guarantees and in what instances they might be required, and how that may affect the relationship with the banker?
Yes. So personal guarantees are something that when there's lending involved, banks will require in the significant majority of circumstances. So if you're borrowing money and if you don't have, like most of us, if you're not drowning in really liquid assets that are worth a lot of money, the bank wants basically a blanket guarantee from you saying that if something were to go wrong and the business was not able to repay the debts, that you personally would be responsible for that. And so it's typically an unlimited personal guarantee on top of whatever assurances the business gives. And so this is something that you should definitely discuss with your banker, and you should discuss with your attorney. But there are circumstances where banks don't need it, but those are unusual. And so it has to do then, you might assume that it has to do with credit score. Not really. Credit score is important, but it has more to do with really what other assets you might be able to put up as collateral that gets the bank comfortable. Because it's if the bank lends money, they need what we call recourse.
I'm sorry, this is Mike. If I could just follow up on that, the another place where that is oftentimes comes into play is with the real estate leases, and oftentimes entrepreneurs will sometimes sign a lease and also sign personally on the bottom of it without realizing what they've obligated themselves to. And unlike a bank loan, if it's a $50,000 bank loan, it's easy to quantify how much you owe. If you sign a lease for 10 years and it's it's $4,000 a month, and you signed it personally, you've just signed a personal obligation for all of those rents, the aggregate amount of all those rents. Now, and there are some laws about the requirement of a landlord to try to ameliorate the liability. but if for some reason they can't rent it after good faith efforts, and that lease is still outstanding, I've seen that put a lot of entrepreneurs into a serious financial.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is I find some of my clients don't realize that with bank loans, there might be some type of requirement of a audit or review or a compilation, which also has an additional expense, which could be somewhat significant, depending on the requirements of the bank loan. And I find that a lot of times clients just kind of gloss that right over and don't realize of that expense as well.
Great, thanks for the input. Since we're already talking about loans, I just wanted to maybe demystify one of the myths. Maybe it's not myth. I'll ask Patrick to talk about it. They say that new businesses never qualify for a small business loan, and that the loan officers only care about your credit score. And I think you touched upon the credit score. You can just talk a bit more about, really, is it true that new businesses never qualify? And if it's not true, please enlighten us about that as well.
Yes, so that is a myth. It's categorically false that new businesses never. And we'll get to how banks get comfortable with that. Credit score is important, and so you should work to maintain and make sure that your credit score is accurate and that it's appropriately managed. And that's something that a banker can normally speak to, although it's a bit complicated. For new businesses, very frequently, I had mentioned the SBA earlier. Very frequently, new businesses will be backstopped by an SBA guarantee. SBA stands for Small Business Administration. It's a federal program, or it's actually a number of federal programs designed for different types of borrowers, different types of businesses, where the federal government will guarantee a portion of that loan in the event that the borrower defaults. So that can be anywhere from 50% up to, or probably even lower, up to 70, 80%, 90% sometimes, where that just gets the bank, gives the bank significant comfort, makes the bank much more likely to lend money. You'll see that what we say is most startup businesses and any restaurants, because if you know anything about bankers and restaurants just tend to be very risky. And so you'll see SBA, we'll work with SBA more frequently with those types of businesses. So if you're going in with a startup, and this ties in well to how to evaluate what bank you should work with, you want to, if it's a startup that you're launching, you should know that it will likely be SBA, and it would be helpful to you to know what banks in your area work with SBA at all or work with SBA more frequently. Now I say this as full transparency. M&T, we love SBA. We work with SBA frequently. If you're in the Syracuse region, there's another bank locally called Berkshire that also works with the SBA a lot. And so the SBA process is complicated and it's very detailed, and you want to make sure that you're with a bank who knows how to do that, because it adds time. And as long as they're not having to educate themselves on how to do it in the first place, it'll be a little bit easier. It'll go a little bit faster. So if you have a startup, assume it's going to be SBA, and try to find a bank that should be one of the criteria that you use when evaluating which bank you should use.
Great, thank you very much, Patrick. Let's go over to Mike. Mike, similar question. I heard sometimes people say, "I will hire a lawyer when the need arises." I don't need a lawyer now. What do you think about that statement, and then how should I go about building a relationship and not making a relationship with a lawyer?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because obviously nobody, not even the biggest companies, goes to their lawyers for every issue and every item, and there are some times when you have to make a decision that has legal implications, without the benefit of a lawyer, either because you don't have the time or the resources, or they're not available, or whatever. But there are certain times where it's sort of cut and dry. Anytime that you may be incurring personal liability, you need to have a lawyer. And if for instance, the items that we just mentioned, such as getting a bank loan, personally guaranteeing a bank loan, signing a lease that you're personally guaranteeing, and those are sort of watershed moments at which you need to get a lawyer involved. Adding employees, you'll need to have an accountant as well as a lawyer involved, because that it also involves a certain amount of personal liability if it's not done properly, if the proper funds aren't withheld. So it's a balancing act, and you have to show some exercise of good business judgment on your own. If you can establish a relationship with a friendly lawyer that isn't going to charge you every time he or she picks up the phone, that would be helpful. I think usually, unless that person's a family member or a friend, we're going to hope that at some point, the company becomes successful and they can, afford the more regular legal fees. But it also ties into, I see a question on the side here where somebody is questioned whether or not is it appropriate or is it recommended to use Legalzoom. I'll tell you a dirty little secret. My wife used Legalzoom to set up her business, even though I've been a corporate lawyer for 30 years. Now, I plan on suing her at some point for, representing people against her to show how foolish she was for doing that. But I'm joking. For some businesses and some people, the online services to set up a corporation can be perfectly acceptable. I think the more liabilities you incur, or the more money you make, or the more sophisticated the company gets, I think you want to move out of that as quickly as you can. For instance, if you have a 1 or 2 person business, then that may be appropriate. But and just to go back to the beginning, the reason you do that is because you want to have the liability protection of a corporate shield. And by corporate shield, either a corporation, a limited partnership, or an LLC. Limited partnerships are not used very often these days. LLCs are much more commonly used than corporations, but S corps for small businesses are still very much put into use. Eric can talk about the difference between an S corp and a C corp. The tax aspects of it. But you essentially, the first thing you want to do when you start a business is you want to put up a corporate shield to protect your personal assets, because you can be liable for business people on the other side who you've made obligations to if you don't have that corporate entity set up. And you have to set it up in the right way so that it's real and not just an alter ego for you as the business person, which means you have to file papers with the state, with a state, to incorporate or form. You need to set up bank accounts. You need to respect those bank accounts. You need to segregate your business funds from your personal funds. You need to fill out and complete all the paperwork that they give you. And for a very simple business endeavor, that may be perfectly acceptable. But as you get into more complicated issues, like having partners or employees, or who's going to make the decisions, just to go to a limited liability company, LLCs, very quickly. They are very advantageous because you can have many different owners and you can have people who are not citizens of the U.S. as owners. But at the same time, it's difficult to give incentive options to employees. It's more complicated and more difficult than doing it with a corporation. And there are a lot of issues that arise. How's the decision-making process going to be made? If you have a 50-50 ownership with somebody else, well, that unless you're very lucky, that is a recipe for disaster very often. If you don't have one person or a majority of people who can make a decision, then sometimes your business can come to a halt or even have to disband because of the failure to have a decision-making process in place. If bank funding is required and the bank requires guarantees from the owners, and one person is willing to give that and the other, then that's a dispute that need to be either resolved or a mechanism for resolution being put into place. So it's a long-winded way of saying that it's certainly better than nothing to organize under Legalzoom or some other online service. If you fill out all the forms and follow the procedures, that will certainly give you some protection. But as your business grows and you add more people to the mix, and there are more contracts that need to be entered into and legal relationships that need to be established, you really need to engage a lawyer to help you navigate through that in order to make sure that you and your business are fully protected.
Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Marty. Question, kind of similar question. I heard some entrepreneurs saying that, hey, if I get sued, I don't have insurance, I'll just shut down my business. Is that feasible or not? And what are some of your recommendations from insurance side? So answer that question and let us know also what do you think is the best way to establish and maintain relationships with your insurance agent.
So that's a good question, and that's one I get fairly often. If you get sued and you don't have insurance, then more than likely the assets of the company are going to be used in that suit. And I'll leave it to Mike to kind of talk more about how the legal process happens there. But really, from the insurance side, that's why you want insurance, because you're protecting your company. In some ways, you're protecting the general public. That's what general liability is for. But ultimately you want it there to protect you and your business. So, if in that specific circumstance, if you're sued, there are ways that insurance can protect you. And I'll kind of leave the answer very broad there, because there are circumstances where you might not have coverage. But to answer the question, that's why you would want insurance.
And if I can expand on that, insurance is great. I mean, you can, and sometimes people have more than they think they do through their homeowners or whatever. But we have a lake house that we rent out, and I've got the ownership of that in a LLC, and I've also got some umbrella liability insurance on top of it, because I don't know who could get hit by a boat or who could drown or something could happen to them. So it's it's always good to have insurance. You do hear some people sometimes say, "What do I care? I'm judgment proof anyway." If you don't think you have a lot of assets. But even so, if the person that your company had an obligation to loses enough money or is sufficiently motivated, they may continue to pursue you even if the company no longer has any assets. And they may try to prove that that you operated the company either without sufficient capital or as the alter ego to your individual person, and try to pierce through what they call as the corporate veil. And I've seen that. I've seen attempts to have that done, and even if you don't have business assets or personal assets, you may well be called into court, and as an individual, those expenses get borne by you personally, and are not and are not. It's not a happy situation. And if you do get a judgment against you, that is something that is public and available for anyone who wants to do something with you in the future. It'll definitely affect your credit score and will make it difficult for you to get bank loans or other forms of credit in the future, credit cards, things like that. So it always pays to dot the I's and cross the T's and read everything before you sign it, and make sure that you're not signing personally, and make sure that you're not treating your business as just another form of your own personal assets, and that's where your lawyers and your insurance agent and your accountants all come into play, and can be helpful to you.
Thanks, Mike. We have about 4 minutes left to wrap up, and I'd like to take the opportunity to ask Eric kind of similar question, building upon from Legalzoom. I heard this thing, some entrepreneurs saying like, oh, it's easy to handle my own accounting because of all the technology that's out there. How true is this? What are some things you would caution them about it? And then your final advice on how do you go about building and sustaining the relationship with your accountant?
And there's a lot of good software out there that could help you do accounting and all that. But unless you actually fundamentally understand accounting, that software is not going to necessarily help you. It's just a tool for accountants. So if you have no actual bookkeeping or accounting experience, you're just playing with wildfire, to be honest with you. There's a lot of different rules and laws, and accounting is always evolving as well. So just because you took an accounting course, 10 years ago, does not mean you know necessarily what's going on. So there's great technology out there, and I don't, take away from that, but you have to truly understand how to actually utilize that technology. Just another thing kind of we specified before, there's a bunch of, different legal entities that you could be as well that, there's no one size fits all, and, every entity is different, but, between, S corps and C corps and, LLCs and all that, there's a huge different accounting consequences, tax consequences with all those as well, and certain advantages and disadvantages with those. So you really should sit down with someone and truly understand what your plan is, because, if you plan on selling your company in 5 to 10 years, one entity might be way more beneficial for that than another. And just thinking long-term as well as short-term. So.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. So I want to thank you all. Our time is almost done, and there's no questions on the internet, on the people are watching live. So I want to conclude it again. Thank you, Patrick, Mike, Marty, and Eric for joining us today to talk about the B.A.I.L team. Keep entrepreneuring, and make sure whoever's watching to put together your B.A.I.L team and reach out to IBMF if you have any additional questions, concerns, and other recommendations can help you with starting a business. Again, thanks for watching. Best of luck. Thank you, guys.